Savage Origins. The Ape. Part 1. Rise of a Leader. Leader. Angry. Leader. Fight. Mom. Leader. Kill. Mom. Leader. Kill me. I run. I climb tall tree. Small branch. Leader. Too fat. I scared. White snake. Scream. Water. Pouring. Cold. Shadow. Coming. Shadow is flying. Rock. I leap. I climb rock. I find warm. I sleep. Mom. White snake gone. Morning. Hungry. Mom. Heart. Big ape man. Guard. Heart. Scary. But hungry. Ape man not move. Hungry. Rock sounds like mom heart. Strange grass on heart. I eat. I feel sick. I wake up. I feel different. And I can think. I recognize ideas, thoughts. The young ape saw his environment in a new kind of light. He was able to notice much more details to the statues. No longer did it think that the statues were living beings, but thought of them as lifeless entities that honored some kind of primeval tribe that worshipped a larger one. The proof was in the deduction of the statues. No one in this troop or the species has been able to make an educated guess, for the medieval apes would rather be fighting among each other for supreme dominance, migrating when bored, or hunt for food. It only remembered bits and pieces of its short time before the grass. It sat at the base of the large obsidian foot, studying the fierce gaze for a few minutes. What is this figure? It pondered. A rock-splitting boom echoed through the corridor. Little pebbles tumbled down from the ceiling while the floor vibrated. Seconds later, a larger boom followed, shifting the floor into violent jolts, causing the young simian to fall into his backside. One of the walls of the caverns was slowly grinding downwards towards the cavern floor, elevating a large crop of dark brown dust. The cub got on its small, hairy feet and cautiously hobbled on over as the wall continued its descent. With a sudden flash of light, the stony wall exposed a window to a blue sky, and he he briefly saw large creatures with pebbly gray skin, ivory white tusks, and large slender trunks. He hobbled towards the edge of the cliff and saw tens of thousands of trumpeting elephants all clumped together in a large landmass, slowly moving away and descending towards a vast savanna. Without a second thought, the little ape quickly wobbled back into the darkness until it reached a considerable distance. Then, it sprinted towards the mouth of the cave, and with a mighty leap, he was in the air. It stretched its arms frantically towards the edge of the cliff, hoping that the jump was more than enough to grasp onto the solid rock. It missed by a fraction of a hair and continued plummeting towards the earth. Frantically, it waved its hands maniacally until, luckily, he grasped a rock that was just poking out of the descending bluff. Down below were white sheets of fluffy clouds, gently grazing over the hot, dry landscape. Above was an island hovering in thin air, simply floating away from the savannah and the thousands of elephants that it left behind. It quickly scampered up the rock until he was met by a looming shadow that belonged to a large, bellowing elephant. It cocked its large head alarmingly at the ape that was at its large feet. The little ape froze, silently locking eyes with the large pachyderm. The two continued to stare each other down for a moment. Then, with a long groan, the elephant turned away to join its large herd. A sigh of relief escaped the little creature as he climbed onto solid earth. It shot a gaze towards the sky, with the clouds completely engulfing the floating island. The heaping large rock continued to fall steadily towards the earth until it gently, but loudly, merged with a large gorge in the savannah. Once it made contact, the elephants nervously started trumpeting. Their lumbering, clumsy bodies pressed together in a large mass of wrinkly gray skin. Then in droves of tens, which quickly turned into hundreds, they stampeded onto the dry land, shaking the earth with low, booming, heavy footsteps. The small ape followed behind until their hairy paws brushed against the yellow, dry grass. Beyond the horizon was a dense haze rising from the ground and the outline of a lush tropical forest. His kind did not do so well in the intense heat brought up by the sun. He remembered that the leader would lead the tribe on a death march on through the dry season of the Serengeti. The adults could handle the trek, for they had the strength and the endurance to do so. The toddlers and the elders would not make the journey. The youngsters would quickly dart playfully across the vast plains, but within an hour they would grow tired and climb onto the powerful, fluffy backs of their respective mothers. The march would last for days, with very short breaks and very little to eat. On the fourth, the cubs start to plop on the thin strands of the grass, lifelessly. The mothers would whimper over the tiny, hairy corpses, but they were quickly beaten by their cruel, evil leader to resume their march. The elders would meet their end just as quickly, for their tired old bodies could not keep up with the pace of the tribe, and they were picked off by predators that drew near. As the little ape drew near, the mist uplifted, revealing dense, towering trees covered with thick vines and overgrowth of leaves. Once there, it wedged its fingers between the very thin lines of the bark, hoping to pry it open, but to no avail. There was a sound from high up in the bushes that jittered across the hazy air. The little ape looked upward, but could not see the culprit of the strange sound. It rang once more. His eyes skimmed through the foliage once more, but he could not find it. With the final rapping, he could spot it. Among the foliage was a small, red-crested bird with a snow-white underbelly and jet-black stripes across its tiny wings. The bird twisted its head from side to side. Then it pecked in a rapid succession at the bark, chipping away at the tree. The ape continued to look at the bird. How could a small bird break away at a tree? It thought while witnessing the bird digging its beak into the tiny hole, pulling out a small worm. Its nose must be hard enough to go through the skin of the tree. It brushed its index finger across the flat, broad nose. It is so soft and fleshy. Not hard enough. It combed the thin grass with its long, narrow fingers until it felt something smooth, then plucked it. It was a long white bone with one of the ends broken off. It dug the sharp end into the crevice of the bark. It leaned forward, putting all the weight behind until the tree bark split wide open, revealing a nest of larvae, each slightly larger than a thumb. It shoveled the squirming insects into the mouth while examining the bone. With a flip, it grabbed just above the sharp end and banged the dull end against another tree, tearing away at the bark. Then it inspected the broken tree, then the bone, then the tree again. This could be a good tool, he thought to himself. He traversed through the trees, swinging from many branches until a familiar primal shriek filled the air. It was the call of two apes fighting over some quarrel, one of them being higher pitched than the deep, ominous other. In an instant, rage filled the savage little heart, and his face began to furrow, with his forehead forming deep crevices of anger. Without a second, he raced towards the sound until he finally reached the source. Far below the thick underbrush were dozens of simians encircling around a young, slightly smaller ape and a fully grown adult bull ape. They were screaming at each other in a mad frenzy, bearing yellow large canines. Very rarely did the young dare to challenge the adult. The only time they would do so is when the alpha was showing any signs of age. Sure enough, despite its hulking size, it was slow and moved clumsily. The hairline receded into the middle of the scalp with only few strands of snow-white hair. The bags of puffy wrinkles folded underneath the eyes, giving it a permanent look of squinting. The body was fat, with many scars from its previous battles with current and past tribe members that possibly perished in the scuffle or submitted in the conflict. With a sudden burst of speed, the younger one charged forward, clutching its fist into a ball. He swung upward, connected with the lower jaw of the elder. The old fighter staggered backwards and lunged forward with the jaws wide open and fangs poised to clasp around the young vibrant neck. The young halted the advancement by digging its thick, hairy, sausage-sized fingers into the mouth and clasped around the muzzle with its thumbs. The jaw struggled to close, and the elder roared in frustration, with specks of saliva projecting onto the youngster's face. With iron muscle, the hands forced the mouth to expand wider and wider until the sides of the fat, hairy lips began to split apart. The elder pummeled the flat, broad side of its hand in an ill attempt to force the stubborn attacker to let go. The mouth widened further, and with a final yank, there was a loud crack. The lower jaw met with the fat, hairy chest, and the muzzle pointed towards the sky. The lips were completely torn towards the back of the head, and the blood ran down from the jaw to the floor. Witness to the madness was a small ape who sat silently perching on a high, hanging branch concealed within the thick shrubbery. The ape stood, wide eyes at what they just witnessed, then scampered in fear, for a blood-curdling shriek escaped the new leader's throat. With sinister thoughts inhabiting its tiny, evil brain, it immediately strides ominously towards the she-apes. He began to foster an intense hatred for the victor of the battle, for his actions reminded him of what the old leader did to his mother. The long, hairy arm gripped tightly at the hairy, muscular leg of a fleeing female. With a quick yank, she lost her footing and was dragged through the foliage, letting out a terrified screech. The young dictator climbed on top of her and pinned down the arms that were waving frantically. No longer willing to witness her atrocious actions, the cub dove in with falcon-like speed, with the bone club raised above while screaming. It struck the mighty backside of the savage, who shouted in pain. It quickly turned around and snatched the bone club from the cub. Stood before the 3-foot 5-year-old toddler was a large 5-foot bulking behemoth of a brute who was just short a few more years before it came into its prime. The female that was pinned down quickly pushed the brute off and scampered away safely. Enraged, the bull ape charged towards the cub with the bone grasped tightly. The toddler darted quickly underneath the entanglement of roots of a large, hollowed-out mossy tree. The large forelimb reached under, navigating its hand through the roots while grunting in frustration. The cub himself was having a hard time traversing through the snake-like roots. The roots latched onto the cub's limb with fierce tenacity, and it took all his adolescent strength just to break away. Suddenly, he felt something warm and rough grasping at his hands. The great beast yanked the cub underneath, dragging the screaming little ape with the same brutal fashion he did with the female earlier. The little ape on its back could only watch in horror as the ape raised the massive bone over its head and brought it down on him. The bone cut across from his right eye, and for a moment he could only hear a high-pitched screech. Dazed and confused, he mustered all his willpower to focus. He picked up the high-pitched sound of the she-ape, still screaming away into the foliage. It was within that moment that he thought about his mother. With the thought of his mother being slaughtered still fresh on his mind, he kicked the brute off, leapt on top of him, and bit into his throat. The savage ape screamed and used all his strength to pry the little cub off of him. It was no use, for his resistance was met with the jaws tightening around his throat. The savage ape gasped for air, and the copper taste of blood was filling his mouth. Then with a jerk, the cub tore apart the throat of the ape. A fountain of blood spewed out, and the savage brute held on to his throat, but his efforts were all in vain. In his last moments on Earth, he saw that the scar he dealt on the cub's face began to glow and slowly was closing up. Now having dealt with the savage, a flood of exhaustion came over the young cub, and he immediately sat on the field of grass. The apes, slowly but cautiously, hobbled over to the young cub, and then in small savage grunts, they chanted, "Leader! Leader! Leader!" Thank you so much for looking at my content, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and the notification so you know when it's out. Yeah, so thank you so much once again, and peace.